At first glance, you might picture a quiet countryside and sun-bleached limestone outcrops, but hidden beneath the surface lies a world of ancient secrets waiting to be revealed. Welcome to the story of a late Bronze Age settlement in the heart of the Kouris Valley on the island of Cyprus, where archaeologists have uncovered a labyrinth of storage vessels, intriguing artifacts, and tantalizing traces of vanished lives. By the end of this story, you may just feel the urge to grab a trowel yourself, or at least to peer a little closer at the landscapes around you. Have you ever wondered how people managed agricultural production nearly 3.5 millennia ago, in a place that balanced local innovations with connections to distant lands? Did you know that Cypriot farmers and artisans carved entire subterranean chambers into soft limestone, leaving behind pithoi, enormous storage jars, deep oval basins, and an astonishing array of grinding stones? By the way, it seems that some of these basins were so large that modern observers nicknamed them bathtubs, although they might not sound glamorous. These artifacts can tell us extraordinary stories about how people pressed olives, stored grains, and made wine in an era before the Common Era had even begun. Let us journey into the local setting. The Kouris Valley in south-central Cyprus is a region filled with history, from villages of the Neolithic era to the later classical cities. This particular site, called Pitharka, stands on the eastern side of a now mostly dry riverbed. It can be found roughly 100 to 110 meters above sea level. If the name Pitharka sounds evocative, it should. It points to the pithoi discovered there, massive containers used for storing or processing various products, potentially wine, oil, cereals, or even water. Archaeologists believe that this settlement thrived approximately 1300 to 1150 years before the Common Era. That period falls into what specialists call the Late Cypriot Second Phase through the early part of the Late Cypriot Third Phase. Although that may sound extremely technical, just remember that we are exploring a time more than 3,000 years in the past, when Cyprus was a hub for maritime interaction throughout the Eastern Mediterranean. An interesting fact: some of the ceramics discovered in these excavations are imports from distant places, such as the Aegean or the Levant, proving that inhabitants of Pitharka had connections far beyond their home island. You might imagine that a site so ancient would be a mere scattering of stones and broken pottery, yet at Pitharka, the bedrock itself is an active participant in the story. The stone in this region is a soft, limestone-rich material, often called kafkala or havara. Because it is relatively easy to cut, people in antiquity chiseled directly into it to create entire rooms and storage installations right below the ground. By the way, you may see the word subterranean often in archaeological descriptions of this region. This simply means that some rooms, corridors, and industrial spaces were either fully or partly underground. The earliest investigations of Pitharka happened due to chance. A subterranean complex was revealed in the early 21st century during modern clearing for construction. Imagine the surprise of workers as they stumbled upon chambers with multiple corridors, air vents, and curious tool marks carved in the walls. Once researchers understood they had found a hidden maze, they noticed it was full of intriguing pottery sherds, stone artifacts, and even a bovine figurine. This deep structure is now recognized as a series of rooms that likely served domestic or industrial roles, or both. Interesting fact: while some subterranean features may have formed naturally, many were evidently expanded or reshaped by humans, leaving clear chisel marks behind. Enormous pithoi robust jars, sometimes holding hundreds of liters, were just part of the story. Archaeologists also discovered bathtubs, or deep basins, presumably used in processes involving liquids. One can only imagine how much olive oil or grape juice must have sloshed around in these large vessels. Another distinctive practice involved sinking the lower third or half of such a jar directly into the ground. Did you know that for many late Bronze Age settlements, these embedded storage jars constituted a kind of pantry, where the ground itself served as insulation, keeping products cooler and safer from pests. If you ever find yourself exploring such an archaeological site, you might see references to rooms or spaces, each identified by letters or numbers, to help the excavators keep track of the layout. At Pitharka, archaeologists have identified multiple connected rooms with thick stone walls. Often, these rooms open into corridors or exterior areas where activity took place in the open air. In some rooms, plaster floors remain surprisingly intact. Picture a carefully smoothed floor with a slight ridge, perhaps used for washing or pressing olives, or capturing runoff liquids. Another interesting fact, occasionally, the plaster near the walls is curved upwards, almost like a shallow basin, so that any fluid would funnel toward a drain or collecting vessel. Besides the walls and floors, many objects shed light on ancient everyday tasks. Groundstone tools are especially numerous at Pitharka. These include grinding slabs, pestles, and pounders, most made from a durable grey-green stone that might be basalt or diabase. Clearly, the inhabitants of Pitharka were pounding and grinding cereals, fruits, herbs, and other materials, presumably in large volumes, perhaps enough to supply not just their own households, but also a broader community. By the way, if you picture a simple mortar and pestle set in your kitchen, amplify that to a heavier, bigger version, and you will have a rough idea of the tools found at this site. But the groundstone artifacts are not limited to cereal production. Some were specialized for pressing or crushing olives to produce oil. Archaeologists even found a small circular stone press featuring a shallow groove and an area for the liquid to drain away. An interesting fact, olive cultivation in the eastern Mediterranean stretches back thousands of years. In some ancient texts, olive oil is considered practically sacred and prized for cooking, lighting lamps, making ointments, and more. Another especially remarkable find is the array of so-called gaming stones. These are large, flat stones incised with small circular depressions, often arranged in rows. People in the region apparently played board games by moving counters across such marked surfaces. Gaming stones from Pitharka vary in size and design, and at least one was discovered upside down beneath layers of plaster in one of the rooms. Did you know that these boards sometimes had multiple lines and grids, perhaps for a variety of games? The presence of gaming stones hints that the inhabitants enjoyed communal leisure time or ritualized play. Speaking of artifacts with a social or ritual dimension, let us turn to one of the more exotic materials found at the site, picrolite. Picrolite is a soft, greenish-blue stone found in certain parts of Cyprus, often used for decorative objects in earlier prehistoric periods on the island. Discovering picrolite items in a late Bronze Age context is somewhat unusual, thus capturing the interest of archaeologists. Among the uncovered picrolite artifacts is a small bead, a button-like piece with curious scratched lines at the bottom, and a complete ring with two carved semicircles. By the way, picrolite rings are not a typical late Bronze Age find, so this example raises fascinating questions about cultural continuity or special aesthetic choices made by these Pitharka residents. Bronze objects, though relatively few, also shed some light on the daily life and perhaps the social status of the people who lived here. A bronze needle was discovered carefully placed within two pottery vessels that were set face to face, as if they were protecting it or forming some kind of symbolic deposit. Another, by the way, small pointed bronze tools could have been used for embroidery, fine leather work, or other craft tasks requiring precise stitching. Another interesting bronze object is a folded razor. Folding metal objects before discarding or burying them is a phenomenon observed at other archaeological sites, sometimes associated with ritualized decommissioning of a tool or weapon. What about the pottery? You may have heard terms like base ring, white slip, or Mycenaean import. These refer to categories of late Bronze Age ceramics. Base ring pottery is usually a hard brownish or greyish ware with a metallic sheen, while white slip is a lighter clay with decorative patterns. Mycenaean imports, from what we call mainland Greece, stand out for their shapes and sometimes their painted motifs. The presence of imported Mycenaean and Minoan transport jars at Pitharka reminds us that Cyprus was part of a robust exchange network. An interesting fact, some jars from the Levant, called Canaanite jars, were also found, indicating maritime commerce with the eastern Mediterranean coast. Together, these imported wares reveal that even a seemingly rural site was not at all isolated. Archaeological exploration at Pitharka suggests that the area was predominantly focused on industry and storage related to agriculture. Why else would there be so many pithoi, grinding stones, and large plastered floors seemingly designed for processing liquids? The site might have operated as a significant outpost that collected and processed goods, grain, wine, or olive oil from nearby fields and orchards, redistributing or perhaps trading these goods onward. The limited but notable appearance of exotic items, along with a few imported jars, indicates that the inhabitants appreciated contact with faraway regions, but did not accumulate foreign luxury goods in large quantities. You might now be imagining a bustling settlement with cartloads of olives, baskets of wheat, newly arrived Aegean traders, and local farmers haggling over the best deals. Yet one of the most intriguing aspects of Pitharka is the way it was abandoned. Archaeologists have not found strong evidence of violent destruction, such as intense burning across all rooms or scattered valuables left behind. Instead, it appears the inhabitants had plenty of time to remove whatever they considered most important or transportable. An interesting fact, large, heavy items such as big stone mortars and pithoi were not easily moved, so many remained in place. Some doorways were even deliberately blocked with stones, and one particular room shows partial signs of burning in its northern half, as though a controlled fire may have taken place. There might have been symbolic or practical reasons to set certain spaces ablaze before departing for good. Abandonment deposits can hold remarkable clues about a site's final days. For instance, that carefully placed pair of vessels encasing a needle may represent a farewell gesture. Sometimes, entire sets of pottery or tools are ceremonially left behind. In earlier periods on Cyprus, archaeologists have found examples where people seem to gather up household items, burn them in specific rooms, and then depart. Did you know that some scholars interpret these rituals as ways of closing a space or transferring its symbolic properties to another location? So what happened next to these people? We cannot say for certain. Perhaps they traveled to a nearby city in search of better opportunities or joined another settlement in the Kouris Valley. We do know that other late Bronze Age sites in the valley, such as Alassa or Episkopi, had major structures that continued to function at about the same time, often featuring the same repertoire of pithoi, cooking vessels, and imported wares. By the way, many of these communities, whether up in limestone plateaus or near the coastal plain, shared a cultural repertoire of architectural strategies and daily life tools. The uniform presence of pithoi, bathtubs, and certain cooking pot styles is a hallmark of how connected these communities were to each other and to the wider Eastern Mediterranean. Pitharka, with its mixture of impressive subterranean rooms and carefully engineered walls, stands as a testament to the ingenuity of local builders. Some walls use neatly fitted stones, while in other places the ancient architects cut directly into the bedrock and then reinforced the openings with mud brick. Although you might not find a royal palace at Pitharka in the classic sense, the site's architectural complexity and the range of items left behind speak volumes. This was clearly not just a simple hamlet. The presence of specialized production areas and industrial-like equipment suggests it was a place of some significance within its region. What can we learn from Pitharka's experiences? One lesson is that rural or semi-rural settlements in antiquity were anything but dull. They had ongoing relationships with major urban centers, perhaps shipping olive oil, wine, or cereals to them, and receiving specialized goods or knowledge in return. Another big lesson is that environmental conditions deeply shaped how these people lived. When you have easily workable limestone, it becomes tempting to carve out subterranean storage areas. If you have easy access to a fertile river valley, why not harness that to sustain a community with ample agricultural wealth? By the way, the story of the bathtub vessels might amuse modern readers. We often think of bathing in terms of personal hygiene, but these large oval basins were likely designed to hold substantial amounts of liquid, maybe for soaking, mixing, or fermenting. It is an interesting fact that the term bathtub is purely an archaeological nickname. In everyday ancient life, these containers might have been assigned some entirely different name and used for tasks that we can only infer from residue analyses or wear patterns on the pottery. Future research at Pitharka will likely probe the site's deeper layers to uncover even older phases and clarify the transformation from one architectural layout to another. Researchers plan to study the surfaces of the many pithoi, looking for traces of wine, oil, or other organic substances. They also will examine the seeds, pollen, and phytoliths, the microscopic silica remains from plant cells that might be preserved in the soil. This can help confirm exactly what kinds of plants and produce were integral to Pitharka's economy. Have you ever realized how much can be deduced from a bit of ash or a seemingly random stone block? For archaeologists, each fragment helps reconstruct the puzzle of a vanished community's daily life. Even the floors themselves, plastered and slightly sloped, hint at production processes so everyday for those ancient folks that they left behind only silent testimonies of their labor. As you reflect on this excavation narrative, consider that every field season yields new surprises. One year might reveal a hidden passage beneath a collapsed wall, while another might yield an unexpected figurine that changes our entire interpretation of the site. Perhaps at Pitharka, there is still a hidden storage chamber sealed off by a final row of stones, waiting to be found, storing anything from lumps of metal to leftover harvests or personal keepsakes. Such possibilities keep archaeologists returning season after season, brushing aside centuries of dust to find the faint footprints of those who lived, worked, and left their mark on the Kouris Valley. By the way, an interesting fact is that some of the best-known Cypriot Bronze Age sites gained worldwide attention for their lavish tombs or large public structures. But Pitharka underscores that everyday industrial-scale processes can be just as thrilling to explore. The big picture is that daily life pressing oil, grinding wheat, storing produce was as crucial to the island's ancient story as any monumental palace or temple. Ultimately, it seems the people of Pitharka left with little hurry but with deliberate intent, possibly relocating to a more prosperous settlement or simply migrating to a different section of the valley. Their departure left behind enough clues for modern researchers to piece together a vivid picture of agricultural production, specialized labor, and a surprising level of contact with distant lands. Although the site's overall function appears practical, the variety of objects, rings, gaming stones, stone presses reminds us that no purely economic center can be stripped of human creativity and cultural complexity. So the next time you walk near a crumbling ruin or glance at the contours of a hillside, remember that entire chapters of history may be hidden below. The ghosts of pithoi and bathtubs, groundstone mortars, and picrolite trinkets might lie there, waiting for a chance meeting with a curious explorer. Pitharka teaches us that even a rural corner of Cyprus can bring to light the resourcefulness, artistry, and interconnected spirit of people who lived more than 3,000 years in the past. Who knows? Perhaps you will be the next to spot a barely visible outline of an ancient wall beneath your feet, or come across a bathtub that once overflowed with the harvest of bygone days. With each discovery, we sharpen our vision of what life was like for the farmers, craftspeople, and traders who thrived in this region so long ago. They were not just part of the late Cypriot second or third phases on some remote timeline. They were real men and women who labored under the Mediterranean sun, forging local traditions yet open to far-reaching connections. And that, in its own way, is an inspiring window into the adaptability and resilience of humankind. And that's it. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy exploring historical worlds, be sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on more exciting stories.